Have you ever encountered pure evil? I've told this story before, about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story. Guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station. He seemed devastated. I was devastated. I mean, I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off. The regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand. I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you, true evil disguises itself very well. Back in 2011, my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random $10,000 and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen, but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested, and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot of the stuff she accused me of, was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 p.m. on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later, but the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children, and the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children, their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. A few years ago a friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Like really bad. He came to visit me one evening as I was getting off of work. When I sat down with him he just seemed off, like a completely different person than the man I had known before. Blank stare in his eyes, no smiling, anger behind everything he said. I chalked it up to the divorce and just thought to myself that he would get better when everything calmed down. I told my wife when I got home about seeing him and she agreed with my assessment. I bumped into his ex-wife and some friends a few days later at another work event. She was actually out celebrating their divorce being finalized I think, and she invited my wife and I over to a house party. That would be the last time I saw her. My wife and I ended up not going to the house party, but the ex-husband did show up. He killed 9 people, including his ex-wife. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family, lots of kids, 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be one road that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda-controlled territory and coalition-controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we did several times per week. And we came across a hole that had been blown into the road, making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effective created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped and murdered. There was maybe a half-inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last, the daughters were unclothed and laying face down, the mother and baby were killed with 1 bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. I ate lunch with the closest thing I've ever seen to true evil every day in 8th grade. When I was growing up, I lived in a small town. We had one kid in our grade that scared the shit out of everybody he met. He was quiet and angry and just wrong. He even had an origin story. When he was in 1st grade, he saw his brother trying to move the TV cart down the hall, but something went wrong and it fell on him and he died. I don't know if he actually saw his brother die, but I do know they were in school at the same time and that his brother did in fact die when a TV fell on him at school. By middle school, he'd started scaring everybody he came in contact with. He'd creepily hit on girls and tell them they'd regret it if they turned him down, but they all did. He tolerated a few of us, and he sat with my group of friends /D&D party /crew during lunch, but even then, he was still always quiet. About a week or 2 into 8th grade, I got called to the office and told that because he sat at our lunch table and we seemed to get along, that the school wanted me to eat lunch with him every day in one of the classrooms instead of the cafeteria. It didn't really feel like I had a choice, so I agreed, and we spent the year eating lunch and playing chess. It took a few weeks for him to open up and start talking, and immediately I regretted it. He had conspiracy theories, raged that girls wouldn't date him, sometimes he'd say things just to try to shock me. He was insanely smart, but his mind was really warped and dark and hateful. It was a really shitty year. When we got to high school, he got worse. He kept harassing the girls, he made a list of everyone that rejected him. He called it his hit list. This was the same time as Columbine, and people were terrified. Students and parents tried to get him expelled, but the school board refused. He got arrested because he was playing Counter-Strike with some dude online and asked if he'd ever eaten human flesh, and this gamer, some random dude from another state, got so scared that he called our town's police. When the cops came, he pulled a knife on the cops, and they found several guns, maps of our school, lists of girls that rejected him, and a date circled on the calendar. Still, the school board refused to expel him. Students formed a mass strike on the day on the calendar, and refused to attend class, and pretty much the entire rest of the school year was spent in terror. We graduated and felt like we'd survived, which I remember was a really messed up way to feel. A year or so later, he murdered his parents in their sleep. He shot them and lit his house on fire with buckets of gas all over the house. He got caught in the fire and died from his burns a few days later. He was absolute, pure evil and everybody knew it. When I was a boy, I had a wicked stepmother who reveled in beating me. She would beat me when my father was not present, threatened to kill my brother if I said anything. She would use whatever objects were convenient to beat me with. Wooden spoon, hairbrush, dowel rod, rolling pin, her hands, fists, belt, whatever. One time she used a serpentine belt. She'd hit me where it wouldn't be visible when my father wasn't around. At one point, she had me drop my pants and underwear, and then beat me until I nearly passed out. I jerked/tensed out of pain and kicked off of her lap, and kicked her in the face. She proceeded to pick me up by my leg and beat my balls with a wooden spoon. I'm not sure if she counted as evil, but she certainly counted as sadistic and vindictive. I know the girl who falsely accused my friend of rape, tried to get him kicked out of university and deported, and ruined his reputation, because her boyfriend found out about their one-night stand. I read the letters she wrote. The things she called him were appalling. It made me sick. Luckily he had saved their text conversations, and her story didn't hold up when cross-referenced with them. He still isn't the same. He had been recovering from depression which made a swift and terrible comeback due to her. He has sworn to never sleep with someone he doesn't know again. When I see her, nice and smiling with her friends, I can't help but wonder how someone could be capable of such a vile action, just because she didn't want to own up to the fact that she cheated. The sheer uncaring for the well-being of others, the absolute lack of empathy, and the disrespect to actual victims astounds me. If she had gotten her way his life would be practically over, also she could pretend to be a better person. I have never hated someone in my life, and I don't hate her. She doesn't even deserve that, but I wish people like her wouldn't exist. Years ago I worked at a Petco and a nervous man came into the store. We were 2 hours from closing and he appeared flustered as he made a hasty walk through the store. He exited the store with the sounds and lights of sirens from the parking lot. After 30 or so seconds he turned and walked back in, this time sporting a revolver. He had a shaved head and facial tattoos and was sweating immensely. I was the only employee at the front of the store with roughly 5 customers in my line. The gunman yelled, "Car keys. I need car keys." Everyone, including myself, were frozen in disbelief. "Small town, nothing big ever goes down normally," he yelled it again and pointed the revolver right in my face, so close I could see the bullets in the cylinder. He then pointed to a kid at the end of the line. Come to find out later, today was the kid's 18th birthday, so he pointed at this kid and sees his lanyard hanging out of his pocket, for fashion of course, and said, "You. Give me your keys." At this point he was holding the revolver about 4 inches from his face. The kid dropped his merchandise and slowly pulled the keys from his pocket. To everyone's surprise, the gunman reached past the outstretched keys and grabbed the kid, pulling him towards himself. He then trained the gun back and forth from his head to the kid's head. They slowly made their way out the front automatic doors. The sirens were deafening and lights blinding. As soon as they exited the second set of doors, I dashed for the store phone and called over the intercom for everyone that there was a gunman in the store. At that moment one of the customers yelled, "He's coming back in." I sprinted from the side of the store to the door. It looked him in the eyes as I flicked the switch shutting off the automatic doors. I backed away as I saw him run face first into the glass, and he started kicking the doors. After a few kicks he started moving away from the store doors, and when he was out of sight I ran over and locked the doors. He could have slid them open if he wasn't panicking. I backed away into the store and moved my customers away from the front. Not even a minute later there was one solitary shot. We waited for 5 more hours, 3 hours past closing, for statements and police sweeps. The police never told us who shot and if anyone was hurt. Fast forward a week, turns out there were 5 agencies outside with a combined 55 cruisers. The chase of this individual started on the other side of town, ending at Petco after his first vehicle was incapacitated. The gunman was shot in the neck by a sharpshooter with only inches to spare from the hostage. He was dead before he hit the ground. This was a traumatizing experience, but the real evil here is corporate. Petco tried to bury this whole story and gave 3 different accounts of how it went down to 3 different news agencies. I got an attaboy from the company in the way of a clothespin that says Petco. I was caught going above and beyond. The police said I saved everyone in the building by locking out the gunman and hailed me as a hero. 3 weeks later I had my yearly review. They already paid me shit and they never gave me full time, so they didn't have to give me benefits. Yet I still saved all those people, because I'm human and value life. Well, the company saw this differently. My manager sat me down for my review and showed that I had superior marks in all aspects and stated, "How does a raise of 35 cents an hour sound?" Evil greedy bastards, I literally told him, "Sounds like I'm looking for a new job." I unknowingly dated a narcissist. I knew something was wrong with him on our first date when I looked into his eyes. They were just cold, dead, empty. Like he had no soul. I was instinctively unsettled, but he was also smart, shy, and handsome, and I figured maybe he had high-functioning autism, so I brushed it off as social awkwardness. Wrong. He went on to be incredibly manipulative, abusing me in such subtle ways I was always doubting myself, and by the time he left me he had worn me down to a husk of the person I once was. We only dated for a few months, yet he managed to destroy me before I could figure out what was even happening. I never knew there were people like that in the world, people who are truly evil, and it rocked me to my core. I have been in therapy for years recovering from this. Always trust your first instincts.